Hello, and welcome to Be Like Christ for our Bible study today. We are in 2nd Chronicles chapter 21, and I regret to inform you that today's Bible study is not particularly encouraging, I guess you could say. At least the context of this chapter, kind of depressing. We're going to talk about an evil king of Judah, but it's going to set up better events to come, so just keep that in mind. 2nd Chronicles chapter 1, free PDF. There's a link down in the description if you want it. We're going to talk about a king named Jehoram, who's also known as Joram, depending on which verse you're in. He kind of has two names. He reigned for 8 years over Judah. His reign fits within the window of 895 to 885 BC. Now, as we go down to our character section, I will warn you that this is where the kings can get pretty confusing because many of them have multiple names, and we're going to see in this chapter, especially the next chapter, that there are kings who have the same names who also have the same second name, but rule in different kingdoms over Judah and over Israel almost at the same time in history. So it can be very confusing. And again, when we finish 2nd Chronicles, my goal is to put together a sheet, a timeline, to give you a visual of when all these kings ruled and their names and their second names so you can keep them all straight. So sorry if some of this seems redundant, but I did it for clarity. So okay, first of all, we have Jehoshaphat. We've been talking about him for quite a while, but coming to the end of his life here, his son is actually going to become king in this chapter. He reigned for 25 years in Judah. And then we have Jehoram, who's also known as Joram of Judah. So he's the son of Jehoshaphat, takes the throne after his father's death. The reason that I have Jehoram or Joram of Judah is because in the next chapter, we're going to talk about a guy named Jehoram, also known as Joram, who is king of Israel, and they are not the same person. And so you'll see that clarification, which, again, it kind of seems redundant because I write it every time, but the reason that I write Jehoram or Joram, king of Judah or king of Israel, is because hopefully in the future I might refer back to these notes, or somebody else might refer back to them just looking for a quick piece of information. And I think having that clarity there will help them not to have to read the entire context of these couple chapters to figure out which Jehoram or Joram we're talking about. So anyway, now, we're going to talk about Elijah in this chapter just briefly. He was a prophet of God who God used to rebuke Jehoram of Judah. And then Ahab. Now, Ahab died some time ago, but he's referenced several times in the next couple chapters because he had a terrible influence on the people of God. He was a king of Israel, the northern kingdom, and he was one of the most wicked kings that ever ruled over God's people. His influence permeates the nations for several generations until God essentially wipes it out or purges everyone in the house of Ahab. Talk about that later. And then we have Jehoahaz. Jehoahaz has a second name. His second name is Amaziah. We'll see that in the next chapter. He's the only surviving son of Jehoram of Judah, and he'll become king later. Unfortunately, his reign is not much better than his father's. But for this chapter, let's talk about Jehoram or Joram of Judah. But first, let's briefly glance at our map. We are going to talk about Jerusalem, which was the capital of Jehoram's kingdom of Judah. It's where the temple was located. We're also going to talk about the Edomites, who were in the land of Edom. They rebel against Jehoram and Judah's reign in this chapter. Edom is located south of Judah and south of the Dead Sea, or the Salt Sea. As we go to our outline, I do have to put out maybe a little bit of a parental advisory here. There's some words that maybe you don't want younger ears to hear, some themes and concepts here, so just keep that in mind. You may want to pause this and listen to it later if there's younger people listening to it. But nothing too drastic. Let's talk about chapter 21. Let's talk about the first section, which is verses 1 through 11, Jehoram's reign in Judah. So as we mentioned a couple times, Jehoshaphat was the previous king. He dies, and he leaves his oldest son, Jehoram, the throne. So he becomes king. When Jehoram became king when he was 32 years old, and the first thing that he did was murder all of his brothers, probably to eliminate any competition or rivalry for the throne. Jehoram is basically just described as an evil king. He married a daughter of Ahab, who we mentioned was a seriously wicked king who reigned over Israel. He had no business marrying a daughter of Ahab and making an alliance with him, but he did. And the text says that he, quote, did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Verse 6. On account of this evil, God caused the Edomites to rebel against Judah during the reign of Jehoram. We're told that Jehoram set up high places, which were those unauthorized places of worship where idols were often worshipped. He led the people in whoredom. That's the word used in the text. Now, this may refer to a couple things. It may refer just physically to like sexual immorality. But there's also a sense in the Bible where this term is used to talk about idol worship, which is considered spiritual whoredom. You can see that in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 5, and Ezekiel chapter 6 and verse 9. Honestly, it was likely that he probably led the nation in both of these things, both the physical sexual immorality and spiritual immorality. God is going to respond to Jehoram's evil in verses 12 through 20, which is our final section, God's judgment on Jehoram. So the prophet Elijah sent a letter to Jehoram, which had a rebuke in it, and it also had a prophecy about what was going to happen in the future. The letter contained a list of Jehoram's sins, said that Jehoram's brothers, who he had killed, were all better men than he was. So that was quite a bold statement by Elijah. Certainly could have gotten in trouble for this. Elijah was not too worried about offending kings and queens, though, if you remember from our study of First and Second Kings. So he was certainly a bold man, and God used him in many great ways. Elijah compared Jehoram to Ahab, which was not a comparison that anyone should have wanted. The letter foretold of the punishment that God was going to bring on Jehoram and his kingdom for this evil. Elijah prophesied that God was going to send a plague on the people, that Jehoram was also going to contract a disease. This was going to be a disease of the bowels, which was eventually going to kill him. In addition to this, God stirred up nations around Judah, namely the Philistines and the Arabians, and they came and they pillaged the city of Jerusalem. They took Jehoram's wives and all of his children except one. That one was his youngest son, known as Jehoahaz, also known as Amaziah in the next chapter. As God had prophesied, as Elijah had prophesied, Jehoram became sick with a bowel disease, and in the 8th year of his kingdom, quote, prepare yourself, quote, his bowels came out because of the disease, and he died in great agony. And I don't know if that statement is sadder than the statement in verse 20, which says, he departed with no one's regret. Nobody cared that he died. Nobody was sad. What a legacy to leave. So that is the unfortunate, sad, sinful reign of Jehoram, also known as Joram of Judah, and that is 2 Chronicles chapter 21. So what kind of application can we take from a life like this? I think there's at least one that I thought of. There's a reason that leaders in the church are never to be appointed based on birthright or family relationships or connections or popular votes. Jehoshaphat made a terrible decision in giving Jehoram the kingdom just because he was the firstborn. His first act was to kill all of his brothers. There had to be signs that this guy wasn't the guy who was fit to lead. I don't know, maybe Jehoshaphat missed them, but he never should have given Jehoram the kingdom. But we can learn from this lack of wisdom in Jehoshaphat's part. Chapters like chapter 21 reveal the wisdom of what God has done in the church. It reveals the wisdom of God's qualifications for his elders, for those who are supposed to lead and shepherd the church. And those qualifications can be found in the New Testament in books like Timothy and Titus. Thank God that nepotism and birthright have no vote when it comes to selecting elders. An elder is selected based on his character, his godliness, and his life of service. God sets a admittedly very high bar for his leaders, and that's absolutely necessary in order to protect the church. If those things weren't in place, we would have men like Jehoram running around leading our churches, and that would be a disaster. So thank God for his wisdom in protecting the church. Thank God for Jesus as a better king than Jehoram was over Judah.